The $50 million birthday, a lottery win, a broken family, and a second chance at life. This year I won the lottery. A staggering $50 million. It just so happened that my 66th birthday was a week away. I planned to share this incredible surprise with my children when they came over to celebrate. I had it all figured out. After taxes, I would take the remaining winnings and buy a luxury home for each of them, my son, Ethan, and my daughter Olivia. On top of that, I'd write each of them a check for $1 million. But when my birthday finally arrived, I sat at the dining table, staring at the carefully prepared dishes, waiting and waiting. By 10 o'clock that night, neither Ethan nor Olivia had shown up. I called them both multiple times, but no one picked up. A creeping unease settled in my chest. That afternoon, around 3 o'clock or 4 o'clock, Olivia had called, saying she had to stay late at work and might be home later than expected. Shortly after, Ethan texted me, saying there was an issue with the project he was managing, and he'd be delayed as well. I hadn't thought much of it at the time. I simply told them work came first. But now it was already 10 o'clock. Half an hour ago, I'd sent a message in our family WhatsApp group, asking when they would be coming. It was still marked as unread. With a heavy heart, I pushed back my chair and moved to the couch. On the coffee table lay 2 real estate contracts and 2 checks. A luxury home for each of them, $1 million in cash, a surprise I had been waiting all day to give. Some of my yoga friends had recently gotten into lottery fever, insisting I should try my luck. I played along, never expecting that I would actually win. When I saw the winning numbers, I was so overwhelmed I couldn't sleep the entire night. I hadn't told anyone. They always say wealth shouldn't be flaunted. I chose to take the lump sum payout. Even though it meant losing 40% to taxes, that still left me with over $10 million. I planned to set aside $3 million for my retirement and divide the rest equally between Olivia and Ethan. Somewhere between thinking and waiting, sleep crept up on me and I dozed off on the couch. I wasn't sure how long I had been asleep when my phone suddenly rang. It was Olivia. I answered. But before I could say anything, she spoke in a rushed, apologetic tone. "Mom, I'm so sorry. Work was crazy today and I just couldn't step away. It's too late now, so I'll just head back to my apartment. You should go to bed early." She barely gave me a chance to respond before the call ended. I glanced at the screen. It was 11:47 p.m. Olivia's workplace was far from home. I had worried about her long commute. So after her internship ended, I rented her an apartment near her office. I stared at the dark screen for a long moment. Another 10 minutes passed, and Ethan still hadn't reached out. He was probably caught up with work too. With a sigh, I stretched my aching back and slowly got up. I wrapped each untouched dish on the table with plastic wrap and carefully placed them in the fridge. The real estate contracts and checks, I tucked them away in my bedside drawer. By the time everything was put away and I was ready for bed, it was nearly 1 o'clock in the morning. And just like that, the birthday I had been so eager to celebrate was over. I woke up the next morning. My phone remained silent. No birthday messages from Olivia or Ethan. I sent a message in our family group chat. "It's Saturday. Come home for dinner. I have a surprise for you." But no one replied. After breakfast, I went out for a walk. I ran into my neighbor Mary, who was out walking her dog. She smiled at me and asked, "You're usually out bright and early. What took you so long today?" I gave her an awkward smile, too embarrassed to admit I'd stayed up late waiting for my children. Mary chuckled. "Let me guess, you spent the whole day cooking yesterday and wore yourself out." When I didn't answer, she continued, "I told you ages ago, just book a nice dinner at a hotel. Less stress, less hassle. But no, you insisted Ethan likes spicy food, Olivia likes sweet and sour. And your granddaughter needs a healthy kids' meal. Do you think a fancy restaurant can't handle that? Honestly, you go through all this trouble just for them." Her words stopped me in my tracks. For the first time, I truly thought about it. My entire life had revolved around my children. Before my divorce, after my divorce, all these years. Had I ever put myself first? Before I could dwell on that thought, a sharp, mocking voice cut through the morning air. "Oh, Mary, don't act like she's some poor, self-sacrificing mother. Isabel just loves to show off. Always bragging about how devoted Ethan and Olivia are. What a joke. I turned toward the voice. It was Sammy, an old neighbor I never got along with. We had worked at the same fashion export company before I retired early, even competing for the European market manager position. I got the promotion, my French was more fluent, and my skills outmatched hers. Sammy never accepted that. She believed I only won because of my language skills, not my abilities. Since then, things between us had always been tense. Now, she looked me up and down, her lips curling in disdain. Not even a single piece of decent jewelry on you. I wonder how you've been treating yourself all these years? I had no interest in arguing with her, so I turned to Mary. I'm heading outside the neighborhood for a bit. You two chat. I started walking away, but Sammy stepped in front of me. I waited here all morning just to do you a favor. Don't be ungrateful. She crossed her arms and smirked. Last night was my grandson's birthday. We had dinner at a restaurant. And guess what I saw? The most ridiculous show. I exhaled sharply. Thanks for your concern, but I'm not interested. Can I leave now? Sammy's face darkened with an irritated huff. She pulled out her phone, scrolled through her album, and shoved the screen in my hand. I don't need to explain anything. Just watch. I reflexively tried to push it back. But the moment my eyes landed on the screen, I froze. It was a video. A woman in a red dress, her hair elegantly pinned up, smiling warmly as she greeted guests. I recognized her instantly, Chloe, my ex-husband, Jeff Smith's mistress. Standing beside her, linking arms with her affectionately, they were laughing, talking, looking radiant together. The camera shook briefly before settling on two men standing by the stage, Ethan and his biological father, Jeff. Behind them, two banners stood tall with blaring messages. Happy 25th wedding anniversary, Jeff and Chloe, and happy birthday, Chloe. My granddaughter appeared on the screen, her small hands clutching Chloe's as she chirped sweetly. Grandma Chloe, you're so pretty. Way prettier and nicer than my other grandma. She tilted her head up, eyes filled with innocent joy. I want you to be my real grandma. Next week is our preschool sports day. Can you and Grandpa come watch me? A deafening silence rang in my head. The video ended, but Sammy wasn't done. You should have seen Ethan, she sneered. Bought that old witch a solid gold bracelet. Must have been close to 10 grand. I overheard his wife in the restroom bragging about it on the phone. She scoffed. Oh, and he got Jeff a whole crate of Hennessy brandy, not cheap. Sammy clicked her tongue and shook her head. Funny, isn't it? Every time he visits you, he can't even be bothered to bring a 6-pack of beer. And your precious Olivia? Don't even get me started. She got Chloe an entire gold jewelry set, necklace, earrings, rings. The whole deal. Kept calling her mom. Like it was the most natural thing in the world. She turned to me with a sickly sweet smile. Didn't you always brag about how devoted they are to you? Strange I don't see you getting even a crumb. Mary grabbed Sammy's arm, trying to stop her, but Sammy yanked it away. No, she snapped. She needs to hear this. She needs to see the kind of ungrateful, backstabbing wolves she raised, always scrimping and saving for them. Even sold her big house to help out Ethan. What a joke. She did all that just to fool herself into thinking they actually care. The words hit like a sledgehammer. I felt like I was drowning. I returned the phone to Sammy without a word. My legs were unsteady as I turned toward home, staggering forward in a daze. A bitter metallic taste filled my mouth. I had bitten my lip so hard it had started to bleed. I collapsed onto the couch the moment I stepped inside. Tears held back for so long, finally broke free. I covered my face as if that could somehow contain the flood of anguish threatening to drown me. But no matter how tightly I pressed my hands against my eyes, the past clawed its way to the surface. Relentless and cruel, memories surged forward like a runaway carousel, peeling back old wounds I had spent years pretending didn't exist. My marriage to Jeff Smith had been a disaster. So much so that by the time I turned 40, I had given up on the idea of love altogether. I divorced him and never remarried. Jeff was 6 years older than me. We met through a mutual friend. Back then, he was a tall, clean-cut man with an air of stability, an analyst in the city government's research office with a bright future ahead of him. 24. I was just a proofreader at a publishing house, and not even a full-time employee. My parents saw him as an ideal match, respectable, well-employed. Someone who could even lend a hand to my older brother's career. They told me I was lucky to marry him. So without truly knowing much about his past, I agreed. I only learned the truth later. Too late. Jeff had never married before me because he had once been deeply, irrevocably in love. A love so profound that it left him unable to move on. Unable to fully invest in any relationship that followed. Marrying me had simply been convenient. By the time I understood this, there was no undoing it. A year after we met, we were already married. We weren't overly affectionate, but we coexisted peacefully. There was respect, even if there was little passion. I convinced myself it was enough. Not every marriage needed to be a whirlwind romance. Stability was good. Predictability meant safety. In the third spring of our marriage, I gave birth to twins, a boy and a girl. Thrown headfirst into motherhood, I was overwhelmed. 2 crying infants. Sleepless nights. A body still healing from childbirth. I felt like I was drowning and I wanted to go back to work. I asked Jeff if his mother, Laura, could come help for a while. But every time I brought it up, he made excuses. His father was sick, his mother was too busy. She simply couldn't spare the time. Days turned to weeks, weeks to months. By the end of the year, Laura still hadn't come. My publishing house couldn't wait forever. When I failed to return, they gave my position to someone else. I was heartbroken but helpless. Then came the twins' first birthday party. Laura didn't show up. That was when resentment first took root in my heart. She was their grandmother, yet in an entire year, she had barely visited them. Jeff must have noticed my mood because that night he finally gave me an explanation. His mother, he said, had suffered a bad fall while cleaning the house. She had injured her lower back and had been recovering in bed all this time. She hadn't told us because she didn't want to worry us. Guilt hit me like a wave. I had been angry at her, suspecting her of indifference, while all along she had been injured. After the party, Jeff's aunt came over to see the children. I pulled her aside, concern tightening my chest. "How bad is Laura's injury?" I asked. "Does she need better medical care? Maybe she should come to a hospital in San Francisco." As I spoke, I reached into my purse, taking out $3,000. "Can you give this to her when you go back, just in case she needs anything?" Jeff's aunt hesitated. A strange expression crossed her face, half amusement, half pity. For a long moment, she didn't say anything. Then finally, she let out a small, mirthless chuckle. "Laura doesn't have a back injury." I stared at her confused. She sighed and gave me a look I couldn't quite decipher. "I wasn't going to say anything, but every time I visit, I see you struggling to raise those babies alone. And it just doesn't sit right with me." He glanced around, then leaned in. "The truth is, Jeff arranged for his mother to be a full-time nanny for someone else." I blinked. "What?" "She's been working as a free babysitter." Jeff's aunt said, voice low. "For who?" My stomach twisted. "Maybe Jeff's boss," she said flatly. "The guy travels a lot, and his wife needed help with their kids. Jeff sent his mother to take care of them." I felt something sharp and cold lodge itself in my throat. I barely managed to whisper. "So she could take care of his boss's children but not her own grandchildren?" The aunt nodded. A suffocating weight settled on my chest. She sighed again, then murmured, "I shouldn't be telling you this, but keep an eye on Jeff. Make sure no one steals him away." Her words sent a shiver down my spine. Then she patted my arm, turned and walked away. I stood there, frozen, watching her retreating figure, unable to breathe. The words from Jeff's aunt were like a thorn lodged deep in my skin. That night I tossed and turned, unable to sleep. The next morning, after Jeff left for work, I stepped into his study. I rarely entered this room, only when cleaning, and even then I never touched his personal belongings. I had always believed that even in marriage there should be personal space. The study was simply furnished. 2 walls lined with bookshelves, a desk, and a chair. I sat down, pulling open his desk drawer. Inside were a few letters, his office's metal badge, an address book, and some unimportant documents. At the very bottom of the drawer, I found a black and white photograph. I carefully pulled it out. It showed 5 people. Jeff stood next to a young woman wearing a white floral blouse with ruffled sleeves. Her long hair braided into 2 plaits. I didn't need anyone to tell me the unspoken connection between them was unmistakable. A woman's intuition, perhaps. I flipped the photo over. In the bottom right corner, delicate, elegant handwriting. R. Bound by heart, love buried deep. April 19, 1969. The writing was soft and graceful, likely hers. 1969. That was Jeff's final year of college. My gaze swept across the study, finally landing on a locked cabinet at the bottom of the bookshelf. Minutes later, I found the key hidden in the spine of How the Steel Was Tempered. That night, after putting the twins to bed, I forced myself to sit down and read dozens of letters. And that was barely a third of them. The woman who had written to Jeff was named Chloe. Through her words, I pieced together a love story that had lasted over a decade. They came from the same small town, left home for the same university, in an unfamiliar city far from family and friends. They had leaned on each other, encouraged each other, and eventually fallen in love. Their relationship grew, flourishing in quiet, unspoken moments, until they were inseparable. But before Chloe left for college, her family had already arranged a fiancé for her. She had agreed to the engagement. Every month letters arrived from her betrothed. Sometimes he even sent her money for her study, so their love had to remain in the shadows. By the time they graduated, most students returned home to find work. Chloe's fiancé's family had wealth and connections. They secured her a job teaching French at a prestigious private school. Meanwhile, Jeff, after 2 years of applications, had finally been admitted to a prestigious university up north for graduate school. One married, the other left, but the letters never stopped. When I was newly pregnant with the twins, Chloe had written to Jeff, complaining about the exhaustion of balancing work and childcare. Her husband, always away on business trips, barely acknowledged their existence. She was overworked and overwhelmed, constantly sore from carrying the burden alone. Jeff, heart aching for her, sent his mother Laura to help raise Chloe's daughter. That revelation alone was enough to shatter me. But the next letters, those were the ones that gutted me. Every time Laura takes care of me, I feel both guilty and happy. I want to call her mom, but I don't know in what capacity. I feel terrible for your wife. You barely make $4,500 a month, yet you still send me $1,000 in secret. If she ever found out, she'd throw a fit. You said your wife had twins? Well, the only thing I've ever seen give birth to two at once is my dog. I can't even imagine how big she must have been. Just the thought is horrifying. My coworkers joke about how I always get so many letters. I tell them they're from my husband, my love. They think I'm talking about Bruce, the man I married. The inked words reeked of forbidden intimacy, a humid, suffocating closeness that made me physically ill. That evening when Jeff came home, I threw the letters in his face, screaming, fighting. It was a war zone. I had just given birth. I was physically and emotionally exhausted, and now I was unraveling completely. And him? He just stood there, his face impassive, watching my breakdown with a chilling detachment, as if I were a stranger. Only when I had exhausted my voice, trembling from rage, did he finally sigh in irritation. "Are you done?" he asked. His tone bored. "There's nothing between us, just letters. If it bothers you so much, I'll stop writing them." His words made my fingers go numb, made my legs go weak. But I didn't even have the luxury of breaking down. The twins, hearing the shouting, had woken up and were now wailing from their room. Jeff locked himself in his study, ignored everything. I wiped my swollen eyes and forced myself to my feet. The babies were hungry. They needed their nighttime bottle, or they wouldn't stop crying. But when I went to the kitchen, the can of formula was empty. A crushing wave of despair crashed over me. I had reminded Jeff for days that we were running low on formula. I had asked him, begged him to pick some up on his way home. Even that morning before he left for work, I had reminded him again, but he had forgotten, and now it was too late. Something inside me snapped. I stormed to his study and kicked the locked door open with all my strength. The sight inside made my vision blur with rage. Jeff was sitting at his desk, gently tracing his fingers over Chloe's face in a photograph. His eyes filled with deep affection and longing. He froze when he saw me. I strode over, snatched the photo from his hands, and tore it to pieces. Then I flung the scraps at his feet. "Jeff Smith, you are a lying, heartless bastard. I screamed. I want a divorce. For the first time he froze. When he finally snapped out of it, he panicked. He scrambled to gather the torn pieces of Chloe's face, carefully tucking them into his pocket as if they were the most precious thing in the world. Then he turned on me. His face contorted with fury. "You insane, hysterical, irrational shrew," he bellowed. He tried to storm past me. I grabbed his sleeve, refusing to let him go. His eyes burned red with rage. With both hands he shoved me hard. I wasn't prepared. The force sent me flying backward, my lower back slamming against the sharp corner of the desk. A searing pain shot through me. I couldn't breathe for a moment. My vision went completely white. Through the haze, I saw Jeff hesitate, just for a second. Then he turned and walked out the door, slamming it behind him. The house fell into silence, except for the heartbreaking cries of my children echoing through the night. I don't remember how I made it through that night. Only the chaos, the agony, the relentless cries of my children, their tiny voices piercing my eardrums like needles. The next day, I wrote a letter to Jeff's workplace, the city hall, reporting his inappropriate relationships, but it was as if I had tossed a pebble into the ocean. No response. When I happened to run into Jeff's supervisor, the man had the audacity to chastise me instead, implying that I was being unreasonable, that I was embarrassing my husband by airing our private matters in public. "Whatever disagreements you have, handle them at home," he told me, voice dripping with condescension. "Don't drag your husband's workplace into it." I sought help from the local women's support group. But back then, people weren't as willing to intervene in a marriage unless there was undeniable immediate danger. Jeff's affair? It was just letters, not real cheating. My children were still so young. Their advice: be patient, endure, look at the bigger picture. I was a caged animal, desperately searching for an escape, but every door I tried was locked. My parents and brother were dead set against me divorcing. They said every woman goes through this. Just endure it, it'll pass. Once the kids are older, your life will be easier. Jeff works hard enough as it is. You don't even have a job, so stop making trouble for him. He didn't even bring that woman home, so what exactly are you complaining about? Every time I mentioned divorce, he ignored me. Eventually, he simply moved out into a dorm near City Hall, coming home only once every 10 days or so. The children were too young to understand. They sucked on their tiny fingers, babbling their first words, oblivious to the growing rift between their parents. For their sake, I swallowed my pride again and again. Like so many women trapped in broken marriages, I had become weak the moment I became a mother, and I had two weaknesses. 7 years. 7 years of degradation, exhaustion, and slow, quiet suffering until the final straw. Jeff had secretly sent Chloe another $5,000 to buy herself the latest fully automated washing machine. But the letter had been returned to sender. Chloe had transferred to a new school, and the post office sent it back. I read his words, and for the first time, I felt something inside me snap. We didn't even have a semi-automatic washing machine. In the dead of winter, I was still scrubbing my children's dirty clothes by hand, my fingers raw from the cold. That night I confronted him. We fought. For the first time he lost control. Furniture was overturned, a vase hurled at my head, shattering just inches behind me. I didn't hesitate. I called the police. Then I called a local news station, asking them to report on how I had nearly been disfigured by my violent husband. The scandal erupted. It spread like wildfire, reaching not just City Hall but the state government. Jeff's upcoming promotion, his transfer to a higher state-level position, was immediately revoked. And as younger, more educated officials entered City Hall, his career stagnated. He was demoted. He spent years stuck as an administrative assistant, filing paperwork in the archives. Only then, when he had lost everything, did he finally sit down and agree to a divorce. It took 2 months of relentless fighting. Jeff refused to let go of Ethan. "If you want a divorce," he said, "I keep our son." I agreed. When it came to money, I was ruthless. I threatened to expose his affair with Chloe to ruin her reputation. In the end, I forced him to return every cent he had spent on her. I had no way of knowing the full amount, but I threw out a number: $120,000. By then, his salary had risen to just over $5,000 a month. $50. 000 wasn't an impossible sum, but it wasn't pocket change either. Jeff, of course, didn't want Chloe to suffer. But he also couldn't stomach the humiliation of borrowing money from friends. So he mortgaged his parents' house and took out a loan for $50,000. I'll never forget his expression when he handed me that check. If looks could kill, I would have died 1,000 times over. The house we had lived in belonged to Jeff before our marriage. I left it behind, but I took everything inside, even the old stew pot that had been patched up twice. I hauled it all to the flea market and sold every last item. Then with Olivia in my arms I walked away. Ethan was taken in by Jeff's parents. From that day forward, the only connection Jeff and I shared was the occasional exchange of our children. When my father found out I had actually gone through with the divorce, he was furious. I had defied him. So he never came to see me again. My mother, she would sneak visits behind his back, but she never offered support, only endless sighs and tearful laments. She never once asked me what I planned to do next, never once asked me how I would survive. I was disappointed, but I no longer begged for love that would never come. The road ahead was uncertain, difficult and unforgiving, but at least I had cut myself free from that disgusting, rotting marriage. At least I was no longer the discarded wife in someone else's love story, pathetically struggling to hold on. After the divorce, I used the money I had secured to buy a 650-square-foot apartment. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I bought a few pieces of furniture, transferred Olivia to a new school, and once everything was settled, I turned my attention to something I had been looking forward to: payback. I penned a commendation letter to Bruce, Chloe's husband. I praised his wife's unwavering kindness, her years of tender care and devotion to Jeff. Bruce wasted no time. He filed for divorce immediately, standing before the judge in tears, declaring that his wife had been in a long-term extramarital affair. Unlike what I had experienced, no one told him to endure, no one dismissed it as just a few letters. Instead, everyone condemned Chloe, calling her shameless, immoral, a disgrace. Their divorce was finalized in record time. At the same time, Chloe was fired from her teaching job, accused of accepting bribes from students' parents. Whether she actually did or not, only Bruce would know. I didn't bother following their lives after that. I was too busy building my own. I found a job as a merchandise coordinator at an apparel export company. I had to learn French, master international trade, and juggle raising Olivia. There was no time for petty gossip about people I had long since left behind. 5 years later, I was promoted, becoming the head of European sales operations. And Jeff, he never moved up. He remained stuck in the same stagnant position at City Hall, with no career prospects left to worry about, no reputation left to protect. He finally married Chloe. He even took out a loan to throw her a lavish wedding, but the person who suffered the most from their union was Ethan. Anytime Ethan and Chloe had a conflict, Jeff always sided with Chloe. I will never forget that night, Christmas Eve years ago. Ethan arrived at my doorstep, his clothes tattered, his backpack filthy, his little hands frozen. The moment he saw me, he threw himself into my arms, sobbing, "Mom, I never want to go back to that house again. I hate them." Through his gasping tears, I finally got the story. With Christmas approaching, Chloe had made roast beef ribs for dinner. Ethan, unable to resist the aroma, had snuck a piece. Chloe caught him and she slapped him. When Jeff came home and heard what happened, he didn't reprimand Chloe at all. Instead, he scolded Ethan, telling him it was wrong to steal food. Chloe, emboldened, had smugly ordered him to stand outside in the cold to reflect. It was freezing outside. Ethan, humiliated and furious, had run to his room, grabbed his backpack and run straight to me. "Mom, can I stay with you? Can I never go back?" Looking at his pale, chapped lips, his tear-streaked face, I pulled him into my arms and held him tight. From that moment on, he refused to return to his father's house. Chloe, of course, was thrilled. I don't know what she told Jeff, but the man who once fought tooth and nail to keep his son suddenly stopped resisting. Instead, he sent over all of Ethan's belongings as if discarding an unwanted item. For the first 2 years, Jeff still sent child support checks. Then one day they stopped coming. And that was it. I raised both my children alone. I taught them right from wrong. I put them through school. I saved money to buy them cars, even homes. Now they betrayed me just like their father did. It felt as though I had cried my last tear that night. Outside the window, the darkness slowly swallowed the final traces of daylight. I forced myself to stand, my legs shaky. As I made my way to the bedroom, lying in bed, I felt like a fish gasping for air, desperately searching for oxygen. Then the sound of keys turning in the lock echoed through the quiet house. Olivia's voice followed. "Mom, we're back." I didn't move. I didn't answer. Ethan's confused voice came next. "Mom's not home? Didn't she tell us to come for dinner this morning? Why hasn't she even cooked?" Olivia let out a sigh. "Who knows? She's been getting more and more annoying these past 2 years. So sentimental all the time. Every time I'm around her, I feel suffocated. It's so much easier being with Chloe. Keep your voice down. If Mom hears you, she'll be upset." "So what if she is? Are we really supposed to never see Dad again just to make her happy? He's still our father." Their conversation continued in hushed tones. Then my bedroom door creaked open. A small, warm body barreled toward me. "Vivian, Grandma, are you playing hide and seek with us? I found you." The voices in the living room fell into a sudden silence. Seconds later, both Ethan and Olivia rushed in. The light flicked on. Ethan froze in place. He stood there rooted to the floor, staring at me. His mother lying in bed, face streaked with dried tears. His lips parted, his voice barely above a whisper. "Mom!" Olivia hesitated in the doorway, her expression unreadable. The room was heavy with silence. After a long moment, she cautiously stepped forward, reaching for my hand. "Mom, I'm sorry," she murmured. "We were so busy yesterday, that's why we couldn't come. Are you mad at us?"
Ich starrte her, unblinking.
Saying nothing, she shrank under my gaze, her voice growing smaller. "Mom, I had to work overtime. It wasn't my choice. You know this is an important time for my career." And Ethan chimed in quickly. "Yeah, Mom, we really did have to work, but we're here now, aren't we? We came to celebrate with you today. Come on, get up and have some cake." I looked at them, really looked at them, and all I could see was Jeff, the way they lied so effortlessly, the way they twisted their words, trying to placate me, just as he had once done. Had I been fighting against something impossible all along? Had all my efforts, the love, the sacrifices, the endless nights of working myself to the bone for them, meant nothing against the weight of their bloodline? "Grandma, I want cake." Vivian tugged at me with her tiny hands, her impatience nearly pulling me off the bed. Ethan quickly slipped my slippers onto the floor and helped me sit up, his voice filled with forced warmth. "Mom, Vivian's been so excited all day about celebrating your birthday. He kept saying how much she missed you. The moment her dance class ended, I brought her straight here." They half led, half dragged me to the dining table. On it sat a 6-inch cartoon cake, the design, Elsa from Frozen, Vivian's favorite. I smiled not because I was happy, but because I realized what a fool I had been for over 30 years. A memory surfaced unbidden. That night so many years ago after my fight with Jeff. The empty can of formula on the kitchen counter. The twins' desperate, gasping cries. I had fought through the pain in my bruised back, cooking oatmeal with one arm while rocking them with the other. One would finally fall asleep, only to be woken up by the other's cries. I had hated Jeff so much that night. I had wanted to walk away, but when I looked at my children I couldn't, so I stayed. And I fought for them for years. I worked endlessly to provide for them. I learned French, international trade, everything I needed to climb the corporate ladder to earn just $2,000 extra dollars a month. I had fought tooth and nail against Sammy for that manager promotion. No, now they had gone to that woman's birthday party. Now they had gifted her gold bracelets, expensive liquor, an entire jewelry set. Me at 66, the only birthday cake I got was whatever my 5-year-old granddaughter happened to bring. Suppressing the anguish rising in my chest, I pulled out a chair and sat down. Then in a calm, even voice I said, "Sit down. I have something to say." Ethan and Olivia exchanged a glance before hesitantly sitting across from me. Vivian, thinking we were about to start eating, stared at the Elsa figurine on the cake, her eyes bright with anticipation. I looked directly at my children and got straight to the point. You didn't come yesterday because you were at their anniversary party, weren't you? Their faces instantly changed. Olivia's brows furrowed. Mom, what are you trying to say? She asked cautiously. I kept my voice steady. If you wanted to attend their celebration, you could have just told me. There was no need to lie about working late and make me wait until midnight. Olivia stiffened, her complexion paling. Ethan lowered his head in guilt. Minutes passed in heavy silence. Then Olivia began to cry. She moved from across the table to sit beside me, gripping my hand tightly. Mom, let the past go, she pleaded through her tears. You have to stop holding on to this. Dad has connections, resources, he can help me. In Ethan's case, why should we struggle when we could ask him for help? Mom, we've had it hard too, can't you try to understand us? Her tears fell onto my hand, burning my skin like fire. I'm getting married next year, she continued. Lucifer and I are planning our future, and Dad promised to pull some strings to get him a job at City Hall. She looked at me then, and her next words pierced straight through me. If I can't rely on Dad, am I supposed to rely on you? I stared at her, feeling as if I were seeing her for the first time. Ethan had settled down young, marrying right after college. Olivia, on the other hand, had gone to grad school, then thrown herself into work, always pushing herself harder and further. The more educated she became, the more successful she was, the colder she became. The more she weighed pros and cons before making every choice. She shifted uncomfortably under my gaze. Avoiding my eyes, instead she stared at the Elsa cake and murmured, Mom, I've been holding this in for a long time. If you hadn't caused that scene at City,